Reach out and touch something solid. A table, a wall, the arm of your chair. It feels certain, doesn't it? Permanent. Obviously there, whether you look at it or not. But for the last 100 years, in laboratory after laboratory, we have been quietly running a test that the world keeps failing. We have been checking what the smallest pieces of that solid thing actually do when nobody's watching them. And the answer that keeps coming back is one that nobody asked for, and nobody can fully explain. When you look, they behave one way. When you look away, they behave another. As though being watched were a kind of instruction. As though reality were waiting to find out whether anyone is paying attention before it decides what to be. So tonight, a single quiet question. If the world changes depending on whether it is observed, then what exactly is here when you close your eyes? Get comfortable and settle in. Subscribe if you have not already, and stay with us, because the path we're about to follow runs from the smallest particle anyone has ever measured, all the way to the strangest possibility in physics, and it ends somewhere. Most explanations are too nervous to go. Let's get into it. Part 1. The Editor at the Gate. Right now, as you listen to this, light is entering your eyes. It is landing on the back of each eye, on a thin sheet of cells called the retina, and it is being turned into tiny electrical signals that race toward the back of your skull. Those signals travel fast, somewhere around 350 miles an hour along the nerves that carry them. But here is the part nobody tells you. Before those signals ever arrive, before you see anything at all, a system you did not build and have never been introduced to reaches in and intercepts them. It cuts pieces out. It rearranges what is left. It fills the gaps with material that was never in the original signal in the first place. By the time a picture finally appears in your mind, the one you're looking at this very second, it has already been edited. Not gently, heavily. The colours have been adjusted. The motion has been smoothed. Whole objects have been removed and others have been quietly invented, and you have no way of telling which is which. And yet you trust this picture completely. You call it reality. You have built every decision you have ever made on the quiet assumption that what you see is what is actually out there. But you have never checked. You have no way to check. The only tool you have for inspecting the picture is the very same tool that painted it. You are sealed inside a system that edits everything you see, and the only inspector who can sign off on the work is the editor. I want you to sit with that image for a moment, because it is the thread we are going to follow all the way down tonight. Picture the light arriving at your eye as a courier, sprinting up the nerve toward the back of your head with an urgent package. The package is the world, but the courier never reaches you directly. At the gate, there is an editor. The editor opens the package, reads it, decides what you need and what you do not, throws away almost everything, redraws a few details from memory, reseals it, and only then hands it forward to be experienced. You never meet the editor. You never see the original package. You only ever receive the version that has already passed through the gate. And the strangest part is this. The edit leaves no mark. There is no seam, no flicker, no sense that anything was removed. The picture feels seamless and total and true. That seamlessness is not evidence that nothing was cut. It is the editor doing the one job it was built to do, which is to make sure you never notice the cutting. This is not the version of perception you were taught in school, the comfortable one where the eye is a camera and the brain is a screen, and the world simply pours in through the lens and lights up on the wall of your mind. That picture is wrong in a way that goes far past a small correction. The word you reach for at the end of tonight is not going to be perception. It is not going to be illusion, and it is not even going to be deception, because deception implies someone is being lied to and someone else knows the truth. The word is going to be constructed. Everything you experience as the solid, obvious, undeniable world is being built, moment by moment, by a system whose entire purpose is to keep its own work invisible. And once you understand that the construction is happening, a single question starts to glow underneath everything else, and it does not go away. If a system is editing everything you see, and the only inspector available is the editor, then how would you ever know what was taken out? You would not feel the absence. You would not sense the gap. You would simply experience a complete and convincing world and assume it was the whole of it. So the honest place to begin is not with the grand mysteries of physics. It is with the most ordinary thing your brain does. The thing it is doing for you right now. The thing it has been doing every waking second since the hour you were born. It throws information away. And to see just how much it throws away, and how completely you fail to notice, we have to start with a basketball game and a gorilla that 50% of people looked straight at and never saw. Part 2. The thing you looked at and did not see. In 1999, 2 researchers at Harvard filmed 6 people passing a basketball. Their names were Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabris, and they had designed what would become one of the most cited experiments in the history of how the mind works. The setup was almost insultingly simple. 3 of the people on screen wore white shirts, 3 wore black. Volunteers were asked to watch the short video and silently count how many times the players in white passed the ball to one another. That was the whole task. Count the white team passes. Easy to follow, easy to do, the kind of thing you could explain to a child in 10 seconds. About halfway through the video, something walked into the frame. A person wearing a full gorilla suit strolled into the middle of the shot, stopped in the dead center of the screen, turned to face the camera, beat its chest with both fists, and then walked off the other side. The gorilla was on screen, in plain view, in the middle of everything for a full 9 seconds. It was not hidden. It was not in a corner. It was not quick. It was enormous, and it was obvious, and it was impossible to miss, and roughly half of the volunteers did not see it. Not half saw it and forgot it. Half of them looked directly at the area of the screen where the gorilla stood and beat its chest, and registered absolutely nothing. As far as their conscious experience was concerned, no gorilla had ever been there. When the researchers told these volunteers what they had missed, many of them flatly refused to believe it. Some accused the team of swapping the tape, of playing them a different video the second time. So the researchers showed them the same footage again, and there it was, exactly as before, a gorilla the size of a person standing in the middle of the frame pounding its chest, unmissable. They had been staring right at it. Their eyes had caught every single photon bouncing off that gorilla suit. The raw data had entered the system perfectly, and somewhere in the space between the back of the eye and the arrival of conscious awareness, a filter had quietly decided that the gorilla was not relevant to the task of counting passes, and it had deleted the gorilla before the person ever knew it existed. Now, it would be easy to file that away as a clever party trick, the kind of thing you watch once, feel briefly fooled by, and move on from. But it is not a trick. It is a window onto the architecture, onto how the whole machine is built. Consider the raw numbers. Your senses are collecting something on the order of 11 million bits of information every second. Your eyes alone account for most of it. A torrent of colour and motion and edge and shadow pouring in continuously. And out of that flood of 11 million bits per second, the amount that actually reaches your conscious mind, the part of you that feels like you, is estimated at around 40 bits per second. 40 out of 11 million. That is not a rounding error, and it is not a temporary bottleneck. It is the design. More than 99.9% of everything your senses gather is thrown out before you ever get the chance to become aware of it. Let me put that ratio somewhere you can feel it. Imagine someone handed you a book with 300,000 pages and told you that you were allowed to read exactly one. Not one chapter, one page. And then imagine you were asked to describe the entire story, confidently, in full, having read that single page, and to live your whole life as though that one page were the complete and faithful account of everything the book contained. That is the relationship between the world your senses touch and the world you actually experience. The brain is not handing you the book. It is handing you a one-page summary, and the summary is roughly 300,000 times smaller than the source. You have never read the book, not once, not close. And just like the people watching the gorilla, you did not feel the missing pages. You did not sense the cut. You experienced a complete story, because the filter that removed the rest is the same filter that decides what complete feels like. And the deletions are not occasional. They are happening to you constantly, in every direction, right now. The pressure of the chair against the backs of your legs was there the whole time you have been listening, but you did not feel it until I just named it, because your brain had filed it under nothing has changed and stopped reporting it. The faint sounds at the edge of the room, the temperature of the air on your skin, the weight of your own clothes, the steady background hum of your own body. All of it is being collected, and almost all of it is being thrown out, second after second, so that the trickle reaching your awareness stays small and manageable and useful. This is not a malfunction. It is mercy, in a way. If all 11 million bits arrived at once, you would drown. You could not act, could not think, could not move, buried alive under the full weight of the reel. So the brain protects you by deleting almost everything, and the price of that protection is that you have never once experienced the world as it is. You have only ever experienced the tiny curated edit your survival happens to require. And the editor never tells you what it left on the cutting room floor. So a generous person might say, fine, the brain throws most of it away, but maybe it throws away only the noise and keeps the signal. Maybe that tiny sliver that reaches you is a clean, faithful miniature version of the world, the way a small map can still be an honest map of a large country. It is a comforting thought. It is also wrong, because the next thing we are going to find is that the brain is not making a map at all. It is making a bet, and it places that bet before the world has even finished telling it what is there. Part 3. The world you see is a bet. To understand the bet, you have to meet the man who described it most clearly. His name is Carl Friston. He works at University College London, and he is, by some measures, the most cited brain scientist alive. The framework he laid out starting around 2006 has a plain name, predictive coding, and a deeply strange idea at its centre. The idea is this: your brain does not sit patiently and wait for the world to send it information so that it can build a picture from scratch. It works the other way around. Your brain builds the picture first. Before the light even reaches your eye, before the sound waves arrive at your ear, your brain has already generated a detailed prediction of what it expects to be there. Only then, after the prediction is already made, does it compare that prediction against the signal actually coming in. And here is the move that should make the floor feel a little less solid under you. If the prediction matches the incoming signal, the signal is thrown away. The brain looks at the new data, sees that it already guessed correctly, says, in effect, I already knew that, and discards the real information as redundant. What gets passed up to your conscious experience is not the world. It is the error. It is only the difference between what your brain expected and what it actually got. You do not perceive reality. You perceive the surprises. Everything that went according to plan never reaches you at all, because your brain already accounted for it in advance. Imagine you are standing in your own kitchen. The counter is where it always is. The refrigerator hums in its corner. The window is exactly where you left it. According to this model, you're not actually seeing most of that room. Your brain predicted the whole scene before you walked in, and since nothing in it violated the prediction, the real incoming data about the counter and the fridge and the window was quietly dropped. What you are experiencing as you stand there is, to a large degree, a memory dressed up as the present moment. It is a prediction wearing the mask of perception. You would swear on everything you own that you are seeing your kitchen. What you're mostly seeing is a confident guess that happened to be right, and the guessing does not happen in one place. Friston's model showed that the brain runs these predictions at every level of the system at once, from the cells in the retina all the way up to the highest layers of the cortex, thousands of nested bets firing every second. Each layer predicts what the layer beneath it is about to report. Each layer forwards only what it got wrong. By the time a signal has climbed all the way to awareness, it has been predicted and compared and stripped down so many times that almost none of the original data survives. What reaches you is a thin residue of surprise floating on top of an ocean of assumption. You're not looking through a clear window at the world. You're watching a model of the world that only bothers to update itself when it makes a mistake. And when the model is good, when its predictions are accurate, you're seeing almost nothing real at all. There is something almost backwards in that, and it is worth turning over slowly. You might assume that the moments you see the world most clearly are the calm, familiar ones, when everything is where it should be. But by this account it is the opposite. When everything matches your expectations, the real signal is being thrown away wholesale, and you're mostly experiencing your own prediction. It is only when something breaks the pattern, when a glass falls, when a face appears where no face should be, when a step is missing on the stair, that the raw world actually breaks through to you, because only then does the error survive the filter and demand your attention. The clearest contact you ever have with reality is the moment it surprises you. The rest of the time, you are largely living inside a forecast and calling it sight. If that unsettles you, hold on, because there is a place where this goes further. There is a spot in your vision where the data does not just get filtered down, it drops to nothing. Around 15 degrees off the center of your gaze in each eye, there is a place on the retina where the optic nerve punches through on its way to the brain. At that exact spot, there are no light-sensing cells, none at all, not weak ones, not dim ones, zero. It is a genuine hole in your vision, and at arm's length it is roughly the size of a lemon, and you have been carrying 2 of these holes, one for each eye, every second since the day you were born. You have never seen the gap. And the reason you have never seen it is not that you simply never looked in the right place. The reason is stranger than that. There is no gap when you look, because the moment your attention goes there, the visual system fills it in. The cortex samples the colours and the textures all around the edges of the hole, copies them, and smears them across the empty space, the way a worker spreads filler into a crack in a wall and smooths it flat before the inspector arrives. The patch is seamless. The patch is silent. The inspector walks through the building, glances at every wall, and signs off on a structure that has a hole punched through every single one. And patching a blank spot in your visual field is in the end the small version of what the brain does. The large version is far more impressive. The large version can build an entire limb out of nothing, hang it in empty air and load it with pain. Part 4. The Body as a Guess. What V.S. Ramachandran discovered in 1996 at the University of California, San Diego, started with a man and a hand that was no longer there. Ramachandran, the scientist, the biologist Richard Dawkins would later call the Marco Polo of neuroscience, was sitting across from a patient who had lost his left hand 2 years earlier. The hand was gone, but the pain reported for duty every single morning. The man felt a phantom fist, clenched so tightly that he felt his fingernails digging into a palm that did not exist, burning with a fire that had no fuel. 2 years of medication had not loosened a single one of those phantom fingers. The brain had built a hand out of nothing, and the hand it built was a furnace. Ramachandran wanted to know something simple and strange. If the brain could construct a hand from nothing, could it be convinced to take the hand apart again? So he built something almost embarrassingly cheap. He took a cardboard box and set a mirror upright down the middle of it. He asked the patient to slide both arms in, one on each side of the mirror. The mirror caught the reflection of the intact right hand and threw that reflection into the exact place where the missing left hand used to be. Suddenly looking down, the man saw 2 hands again, both of them open, both of them moving, because when he moved his real hand, the reflection moved with it. And for the first time in 2 years, the phantom fist unclenched. The fire went out. Think about what just happened there. A mirror that cost a few cents did what years of medication could not. It did not block the pain. It erased the hand the pain was living in. The brain had constructed a limb, loaded it with suffering, and then, when a simple reflection changed the picture coming in through the eyes, it disassembled the whole structure and quietly filed the suffering away. So consider the machinery that requires, not just the power to patch a small hole in your vision, the power to build an entire body part, complete with position and sensation and agony, out of pure expectation, and then to take it apart again because the visual input shifted. And if a mirror can unmake a hand you do not have, it is worth asking, very quietly, what that same machinery is doing right now to the body you're certain that you do. The answer is that the body you feel as yours is held together by the same kind of guess, and the guess can be rewritten in about 90 seconds. In 1998, 2 researchers named Matthew Botvinnik and Jonathan Cohen, working at Carnegie Mellon, sat a volunteer down at a table. They placed a realistic rubber hand on the table in front of the person, in plain view. The person's own real hand was hidden behind a small screen, out of sight. Then a researcher took 2 small brushes and began to stroke both hands at the same time, in the same place, with the same rhythm. The bristles traced identical paths across the rubber hand the person could see, and the real hand they could not. A minute and a half later, something had quietly broken loose. The volunteer stopped feeling the brush on their real hidden hand, and started feeling it on the rubber one instead. The brain had looked at the perfect synchrony between what it saw and what it felt, decided the rubber hand must be the source, and transferred ownership of touch to a cold piece of plastic, and then the researcher picked up a hammer and swung it down at the rubber hand. The volunteer yanked backward. Their real heart rate spiked. Sweat broke out across the palm of their real, hidden, perfectly safe hand, the one that was never in any danger at all. The body had mounted a full emergency response to protect a thing that was not warm, not alive, and 90 seconds earlier had not been theirs. No surgery was involved, no anaesthetic. Just a brush and a minute and a half, and the deed was done. The line around your body had been redrawn while you watched. A researcher named Henrik Ehrson at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm read this work and asked the obvious next question. A hand is only a part. What about the whole thing? In 2007, he mounted a camera on the head of a mannequin and fed its view into a set of goggles worn by a living person, so that the person looked down and saw a plastic body where their own should be. Then he touched both chests at the same time, the mannequin's and the person's in perfect sync. 2 minutes. That was all it took for the person to feel that the plastic body was theirs. Threaten the mannequin, and they flinched. Their skin reacted, the same stress response firing. For a body made of polymer and paint, a hand in 90 seconds, an entire identity in 2 minutes. The border between you and not you can be redrawn with a brush and a camera in less time than it takes to soft-boil an egg. The border is not a wall, it is a guess, and the thing making the guess changes its mind easily. Think about what that means for the most basic feeling you have, the feeling of being located inside a particular body, of this being your hand, your chest, your shape pressing into the chair. That feeling does not come from some permanent fact stamped into you at birth. It is computed, fresh, moment by moment, from the way your senses line up with each other. When sight and touch agree, when seeing a hand stroked matches feeling a hand stroked, the brain concludes that the thing it is watching must be part of you, and it extends the borders of you to include it. Normally this works flawlessly, because the only thing that ever lines up with your sense of touch is your actual body. The illusion only appears in the lab because the researchers deliberately feed the brain a false but consistent match. But the fact that it can be fooled at all, this easily, this fast, tells you that the boundary of yourself was never a fixed edge in the first place. It was always a conclusion the brain keeps quietly reaching over and over and updating whenever the evidence shifts. You're not a thing with a hard edge. You're a continuous act of deciding where you end. But a brush and a camera can only reach the thing sitting in front of you. They can move where you are and what body you seem to wear. They cannot touch the one thing that carries you forward whether you agree to it or not. They cannot touch time. Part 5. You are never in the present. Time feels like the one thing that cannot be edited. A second passes, and then another, and the sequence does not seem to care about mirror boxes or rubber hands. The clock moves forward and it does not ask your permission, except that the clock does ask, in a sense, and your brain answers with whatever it needs to in order to keep the picture smooth. To see why, you have to look at how the different signals from your body actually arrive because they do not arrive together. Consider the timing. Light hitting your eye reaches awareness in roughly 80 thousandths of a second. Sound takes longer, around 150. A touch on your face arrives in about 50. But a touch on your toe has to travel all the way up your leg and your spine, and it takes nearly half a second to get there. Every channel is delivering the present moment to you at a different speed, like 5 couriers carrying pieces of the same message along 5 different roads of different lengths. If your brain simply handed each one to you the instant it arrived, the world would stutter and tear. You would see a person's lips move before you heard their voice. You would see a foot hit the ground before you felt it land. The whole experience would fall out of sync. So the brain does something quietly astonishing. It holds the fast couriers at the door. It waits for the slowest one to arrive, and only then does it stitch all the signals together into a single smooth frame and stamp it with one word, now. Which means the moment you're experiencing as the present was actually assembled after all of its pieces had already happened. You are never truly in the present. You're always watching a version that was edited together a fraction of a second ago. You are, in the most literal sense, watching the last cut. Let that settle, because it is gentler than it sounds and stranger than it looks. The present moment, the one thing that feels the most immediate, the most undeniably now, the place you're absolutely certain you are living in, is the one thing you can never actually occupy. By the time the brain has gathered the slow couriers and the fast ones, lined them up, and stitched them into a single smooth scene and handed it to you, the events that scene describes are already behind you. Not by much, a fraction of a second, but always behind you, always. The now you live in is a recently finished edit of a moment that has already passed. You're like someone watching a live broadcast that is actually running on a small delay, certain they are seeing events as they happen, never suspecting that the producer in the booth has already received everything, trimmed it, synced the audio to the video, and only then sent it to the screen. The delay is invisible because there is nothing to compare it against. You have no second feed showing the truly raw present. because there is no such thing as access to the raw present. There is only ever the edit. There is only ever the last cut. And the editing room does not just wait and assemble. It also reaches backward and changes what already happened, and there is an experiment that caught it doing exactly that. A researcher named Keelan Yarrow at City University London asked his volunteers to do something you have done 10,000 times without thinking. He told them to flick their eyes over to a clock, and nearly every one of them reported the same odd little experience. The second hand of the clock seemed to freeze the instant their gaze landed on it, hanging there a beat too long before it finally ticked forward again. You have almost certainly felt this yourself. You glance at a clock, and for a moment the first second feels stretched. Too long, as though the clock hesitated. It is not a mechanical glitch in the clock, and it is not random. Yarrow measured it carefully, and here is what is happening. When your eyes move quickly from one place to another, there is a brief window, a fraction of a second, where your vision is essentially shut off, because a sharp image cannot be formed while the eyes are sweeping. That window is a blank, a small darkness, and your brain refuses to let you experience the darkness. So it takes the very first clear image that arrives after your eyes land, the image of the clock, and it stretches that image backward in time to paint over the blank that just happened. It rewrites the recent past so that the film has no jump cut in it. The frozen second hand is the seam of that edit, the one place the patch did not quite line up. You looked at clocks your entire life, and every single time this happened, and you never once noticed, so now stack it up. Your brain assembles the present moment out of signals that arrived at different times. It reaches backward and rewrites the instant just behind you to cover the gaps left by your own eye movements. The thing you experience as the seamless, flowing, live present is a reel that has already been cut, resampled, and approved before it reaches the only screen you have. And if the editing room is this confident about rearranging fractions of a second, the obvious question is whether it stops there. If your brain controls when things seem to happen, does it also control when you seem to decide? Because that would be a different kind of question entirely. That would not be about what you see. That would be about who is doing the seeing. Part 6. The decision. Before the decider. Try something. At some point in the next little while, whenever you feel like it, flex your wrist. Just decide on your own, with no warning, and move it. It feels like the simplest, most obvious example of free will there is. You wanted to, so you did. The wanting came first, and the moving came second, and you were the one in charge of both. That sequence feels so basic that questioning it sounds almost insane. And then a neurophysiologist named Benjamin Libet, working at the University of California, San Francisco in the 1980s, wired people up and watched the sequence happen, and found that it runs in an order nobody expected. Libet attached sensors to his volunteers that could detect electrical activity, building in the motor cortex, the part of the brain that prepares movement. He also gave them a way to mark the exact instant they first became aware of the urge to move, by watching a fast-moving dot and noting where it was at the moment they felt the decision arrive. So he had 2 timestamps for every single flex, one for when the brain started getting ready to move, one for when the person consciously felt themselves decide, and the brain got ready first, not by a little. The motor cortex began preparing the movement around 300,000ths of a second before the person reported feeling any urge to move at all. The body was already loading the action before the self felt itself choose it. The decision, in some sense, had already been made. The feeling of choosing arrived afterward, like a press release issued to announce a deal that was already signed behind closed doors. For a while, you could argue with the size of that gap. 300 milliseconds is fast, easy to wave away as noise. But 25 years later, in 2008, a team led by John Dylan Haynes at the Max Planck Institute put the same question inside a brain scanner with far sharper tools. They watched patterns of activity in the prefrontal and parietal regions of the brain, and they found they could predict which of 2 buttons a person was going to press before the person knew. Not 300 milliseconds early, up to 7 full seconds early. In the time it takes you to read this sentence once and start it again, the machine had already read the answer off the surface of the brain, while the person still felt completely undecided. I want to let that sit because it is one of the heaviest things in this whole story. If the choice is forming up to 7 seconds before you feel it, and the feeling of choosing is a notification delivered after the fact, then who is doing the choosing? Not the voice in your head. not the narrator who talks you through your day and believes it is the one holding the wheel. That voice, it starts to seem, is watching a replay and mistaking it for a live broadcast. It receives the decision, dresses it up as its own, and never suspects that the work was finished before it ever spoke. I want to be careful with how heavy I let that feel, because it is easy to hear it as a sentence of doom, and it is not quite that. Notice what the experiment actually shows and what it does not. It does not show that your choices are meaningless, or that your values do not steer your life, or that the careful person you have worked to become is an illusion. The deliberation you do over days, the kind of thing where you weigh a decision and change your mind and weigh it again, is nowhere near this experiment. What the experiment shows is narrower and stranger, in the smallest, most immediate flick of a wrist. The feeling of being the one who started it arrives a little late, after the machinery has already begun to move. The self that narrates is not the self that initiates, and there is something almost freeing buried in that, if you turn it the right way. So much of the harshness people aim at themselves rests on the belief that they consciously authored every impulse they ever had. If the impulse forms before the conscious self is even in the room, then the conscious self is not the guilty author of every passing urge. It is more like a steward, arriving a half-second late with the one power that matters most, not the power to start, the power to stop. But Libet found one more thing, and it is the reason this beat does not close in pure darkness. The conscious mind could not start the movement. The preparation always ran ahead of it, but it could stop the movement. In the brief window of roughly 200 thousandths of a second between the moment a person became aware of the urge and the moment the muscle actually fired, they could veto it. They could refuse. The decision to act was not theirs to begin, but the decision to halt, the last instant no, lived inside that narrow gap. Some scientists call it free won't rather than free will. It is not the throne you thought you sat on. It is a thin sliver of override in a process that was never under your control to start. It is a crack in the wall, a narrow one. But a crack is not nothing, and we are going to need it before the night is done. Because if the brain can edit when you decide, the next question is whether it can also edit how long a moment feels while it is happening. It can, and a scientist named David Eagleman built a way to catch it doing so, at Baylor College of Medicine. He wanted to test the thing everyone believes about danger, that in a moment of terror time seems to slow down. So he dropped his volunteers from a height of about 150 feet, backward, in a controlled free fall onto a net far below. On the way down, each person wore a small device on the wrist that flashed numbers faster than the eye can normally read them. The logic was simple. If fear truly slowed time down, if the brain genuinely sped up its own frame rate the way a high-speed camera does, then during the fall those flashing digits should become readable. They did not. The numbers stayed a blur. The resolution of perception did not change at all, so time did not actually slow down during the fall. What changed was the recording. The brain packed the memory of the fall with far more detail than usual, crammed the file full, and when the volunteers later played that dense memory back, all that extra detail made the 3 seconds feel like 8. Time had not stretched. The memory was rewritten after landing to make it seem like it had. You have felt this yourself. A car slides toward you on a wet road, and the moment seems to expand, every detail sharp, every fraction of a second heavy and slow. Afterward you say, with total honesty, that time slowed down. It did not. Your brain simply wrote a longer, denser file and stamped it 3 seconds. The experience of how long something lasted is not a measurement at all. It is a story the brain tells afterward about how much it bothered to record. Stack that on top of the frozen clock from a moment ago. The brain edits time backward to cover the gaps left by your eyes. It inflates frightening seconds into something that feels far longer. It quietly compresses dull, uneventful hours into a few minutes of nothing. 3 different inputs, 3 different edits, all applied to the same timeline before you ever see a frame of it. You're not riding the river of time. You're watching a reel that has been cut, resampled and approved before it reached the only screen you have. And everything we have looked at so far has been wet. Neurons doing what neurons do, chemistry and tissue and electrical signal. So set the brain aside for a moment, take it out of the equation entirely, and ask a colder question. Forget how the brain experiences time. What does physics say time actually is? And here the answer becomes more unsettling than anything the brain could do, because physics says time might not be real at all. In 1967, two physicists named John Wheeler and Bryce DeWitt set out to write the master equation of the entire universe, a single formula combining the two deepest theories we have, general relativity and quantum mechanics, into one description of everything. They expected time to sit at the very centre of that equation, the way a spine sits at the centre of a body. Instead, when the two theories were merged, time vanished. The Wheeler-DeWitt equation describes the quantum state of the whole cosmos, and it contains no variable for time at all, not because they forgot to include it, because the mathematics erased it. For decades, this was treated as a technical oddity, a quirk that would surely be fixed once someone found a better equation. Nobody found one. In 1999, a British physicist named Julian Barber published a book called The End of Time, arguing that the equation was not broken but correct, that time genuinely does not flow. Every moment that has ever existed or will ever exist in his picture is simply there, all of them at once, like the frames of a film laid out side by side across a table rather than run through a projector. Nothing moves, nothing flows, and another physicist, Carlo Rovelli, took the argument one step further. In his view, the feeling of time passing is a side effect of disorder increasing in the universe. As things break down and spread out, systems lose track of their own past, and the brain, which is itself a system steadily losing information, reads that loss as motion, as direction, as a before and an after. You're not travelling through time, you're a fixed pattern inside a structure where past and future already coexist, and the sensation of moving forward is the most fundamental edit of all. Not an edit of what you see, but an edit of what you believe you are. And if even time, even the forward motion of your own life can come apart like that under a hard enough look, then the thing the edits are being shown to, the observer, the one who feels like a single unbroken thread of you running from your first memory to this exact second, deserves the same hard look. Because that thread had better be one continuous thing, otherwise there is no one in here to fool. Part 7. The Self that splits and switches off. There is a quiet assumption underneath everything we have looked at so far, and it is time to pull it out into the light. The assumption is that there is a single you in there, one observer, one unbroken thread of awareness that the edits are being shown to. Even when we say the brain fools you, we are picturing one continuous self being fooled. But what if that thread is not single? What if the one watching can be cut in two, and neither half notices anything is missing? In the early 1960s, a neuroscientist named Michael Gazzaniga found exactly that. Two threads where everyone had assumed there was one. Gazzaniga was working with a small group of patients who had undergone a drastic surgery to control severe epilepsy. To stop seizures from spreading across the whole brain, surgeons had cut the corpus callosum, the thick bundle of nerve fibers that connects the left hemisphere to the right. The operation worked, the seizures stopped, and the patients seemed completely normal afterward. They walked, they talked, they told jokes, they went back to their lives. But when Gazzaniga began testing them carefully, something surfaced that no one had predicted. Something that only showed up because the two halves of the brain could no longer quietly talk to each other. Here is the setup that revealed it. Because of the way the eyes wire into the brain, what you show to the left visual field goes to the right hemisphere, and what you show to the right visual field goes to the left hemisphere. So Gazzaniga flashed a picture of a snowy scene to the right hemisphere, and at the same time flashed a picture of a chicken claw to the left hemisphere. Then he laid out an array of objects and asked the patient to point at whatever went with what they had seen. The left hand, controlled by the right hemisphere that had seen snow, pointed at a shovel. The right hand, controlled by the left hemisphere that had seen the claw, pointed at a chicken. So far, perfectly logical. Chicken goes with claw, shovel goes with snow. Each half answered its own question correctly. Then Gazzaniga asked the patient a simple thing. Why did you point at the shovel? Now, the part of the brain that knew the real answer was the right hemisphere. It had seen the snow, but the right hemisphere cannot speak. Language lives in the left hemisphere, and the left hemisphere had never seen the snowy scene at all. It had no idea why the left hand was reaching for a shovel, and here is the moment that should stop you. The left hemisphere did not say, I do not know. Instead, without hesitation, without the slightest flicker of confusion, the patient said, Oh, that is easy. You need a shovel to clean out the chicken shed. The speaking brain had been handed an action it could not explain, and rather than admit ignorance, It manufactured a confident, coherent, completely false explanation and delivered it as plain fact. Gazzaniga gave this hidden machinery a name. He called it the interpreter. It is a module in the left hemisphere whose entire job is not to know what is actually happening, but to explain it, to spin a story that makes sense of your own behavior, even when it has no real access to the cause. 2 hemispheres, 2 separate streams of awareness, 1 body between them. And the one that talks, the one you hear when you think you are thinking, will lie to you with total conviction the instant the truth is out of its reach. The voice in your head is not the owner of the house. It is the press secretary, standing at a podium, drafting confident statements about events it never witnessed, in a building where half the rooms are locked. And if the observer can be split into 2, and neither half feels the split, then the observer was never one solid thing to begin with. It is assembled. And anything that can be assembled can also, in principle, be taken apart, or switched off entirely. Which brings us to a white liquid that looks almost exactly like milk, and works almost exactly like a light switch. Its name is propofol, and anesthesiologists use it every morning all over the world. Around 15 seconds after it enters your bloodstream, you're gone. And I want to be precise about that word, because it is not sleep. Sleep has stages and dreams and movement and a kind of inner life that continues through the night. This is none of that. This is absence. One moment you're counting backward from 10, and the next moment you're in a recovery room and 4 hours have simply vanished, with no darkness, no silence, no sense of time passing, no experience at all to remember. Nothing. But here is the part that matters most. While you're gone, the body keeps working perfectly. Your heart beats, your lungs fill and empty, your kidneys filter your blood, your pupils still tighten in response to light. Every system that keeps you alive runs on without the slightest interruption. The machine does not need a pilot in the seat, and when researchers like Michael Alkire at the University of California, Irvine, put this question inside a brain scanner, they found something that reframes what consciousness even is. Propofol does not shut the brain down. Large regions of the cortex keep right on firing while you're under. What collapses is the communication between them. The relay station in the middle of the brain stops coordinating the signals, and the network breaks into islands. Each region is still active. They simply can no longer talk to one another, and when that conversation stops, you stop. This points at something genuinely strange about what you are. Consciousness does not seem to be a thing sitting in a particular place, a glowing core you could point to. It seems to be a conversation between places. Silence the conversation, and the self disappears, while the body carries on without you in the room. The organism you call yourself runs every essential function, with no need for the you that feels so central. You are not the engine, you are not the fuel, you are something closer to the music playing on the dashboard radio while the car drives. Turn the music off, and the car keeps going down the road exactly as before, and then the propofol wears off, and you come back, and the most unsettling thing of all is how it feels. It feels continuous. The 4-hour hole does not register. There is no scar where the absence was, no seam stitching the before to the after, which means you have no way of knowing how many times the music has been switched off and back on. The sense that your experience is one continuous unbroken stream is not actually evidence that it is continuous. It is just one more patch laid down by the same machinery that has been smoothing over cracks since the day you opened your eyes. The only thing connecting the person who went under to the person who woke up is memory, the autobiography running quietly in your head. And that record, the file you trust to tell you who you are, turns out to be the least reliable thing of all. But before we open that file, there is one more question hiding in all of this, and it is the strangest one yet. If consciousness is a conversation between parts, a pattern of integration rather than a substance, then what exactly is that pattern, and could it run somewhere other than a brain? A psychiatrist named Giulio Tononi at the University of Wisconsin proposed in 2004 that consciousness might be measurable, that you could put a number on it. He called the number phi. Phi measures how much a system is more than the sum of its parts, how much information is held in the connections between the pieces that would be lost if you cut those connections. A collection of parts running side by side with nothing real binding them has a phi of 0. But a system whose connections carry information that exists nowhere in the parts alone has a phi above 0. And Tononi made a claim that most of his field was not ready for. Any system whose phi climbs above a certain threshold is conscious, not as a metaphor, actually experiencing something, And phi does not care what the system is made of. It does not require neurons or carbon or anything biological at all. It is a property of structure. If a network of silicon were to integrate information the way a brain does, it would, by this measure, have the same phi and the same inner light. And this is not a purely abstract idea, because in laboratories right now, people are growing small clusters of human neurons in dishes. They are called brain organoids, tiny balls of living brain tissue about the size of a pea grown from human cells. In the lab of Alison Mottry at the University of California, San Diego, these little clusters, with no body, no eyes, no ears, no input of any kind from the outside world, began to produce coordinated waves of electrical activity, and those patterns, when measured, resembled the brain activity of a premature human infant. Nobody is claiming that a clump of cells in a dish is sitting there pondering its own existence. That would be a wild overreach, and it is not the point. The point is narrower and quieter and harder to dismiss. These structures were integrating information. By the measure Tononi proposed, they had some amount of phi, and the mathematics draws no clean line between neurons firing inside a skull and neurons firing inside a dish, or between either of those and any other structure, of any material, that integrates information the same way. If consciousness really is a number rather than a substance, and the number can in principle run on any structure that is wired the right way, then consciousness is not bolted to your particular body or your particular brain. It is a pattern. And patterns, unlike bodies, are portable. They can in principle exist in more than one place, on more than one kind of hardware, including hardware that someone somewhere might choose to build. We will need that unsettling idea later, when we ask what kind of thing could be running underneath everything. For now, hold on to it, and let us open the file we trust the most and watch it fall apart in our hands. Part 8. A memory with no original. Everything we have seen so far has leaned on one last support beam, and it is memory. The reason the edits do not bother you, the reason the gaps and the patches and the switched-off hours all feel like one smooth life, is that you have a record. You remember who you were a moment ago, an hour ago, a decade ago, and that record stitches the whole thing together into a single continuous person. So memory had better be solid. It had better be the one place where the original is kept safe. And it is not. Nobody had really tested what a memory does at the moment you reach for it, until a researcher named Karim Nader tried it, at McGill University, around the year 2000. What he found is that the act of remembering does not open a file. It takes the file apart. Nader worked with rats, whose memory machinery runs on the same basic chemistry as yours. He took a stable memory, one that was weeks old and well settled, and he triggered the animal to recall it. And in that instant of recall, the physical structure holding the memory, the network of proteins that encoded it, came apart. For a brief window of time, the memory was not a solid stored thing at all. It was liquid, vulnerable, open to being rewritten. And Nader proved just how open by blocking the proteins from reforming during that window. When he did, the memory did not come back. It was gone. The simple act of remembering it, followed by a chemical interruption, had erased it permanently. The mechanism is called reconsolidation, and the unsettling thing is that it applies to you every single time. Each time you recall something, the molecular structure holding that memory breaks apart and then rebuilds itself. And when it rebuilds, it folds in whatever you happen to be feeling and thinking at that very moment of recall. You're not opening a saved photograph and looking at it. You're repainting it, and the new painting writes over the old one. There is no preserved original underneath. What you remember is never quite what happened. It is what you remembered the last time you remembered it. Every recollection is a copy of the most recent copy, drifting a little further from the source with each retrieval, and erasing its own tracks as it goes, so that you never notice the drift. There is a cruel little twist hidden in this, and it is worth saying plainly. The memories you return to the most, the ones you treasure, the ones you take out and turn over again and again, are precisely the ones that have been rewritten the most times. The moment you have replayed 1,000 times, your wedding day, the birth of a child, the last conversation with someone before they were gone, is by that very fact the moment furthest from the original event, because each replay wrote over the last. And the memories you almost never touch, the ordinary unremarkable ones, sit closer to their source simply because you have not edited them as often. So the parts of your life you hold most precious are the parts your brain has revised the most. It is not that your memory is failing you, it is that remembering is itself an act of rewriting, and there is no way to remember without changing the thing you reach for. To recall a moment is to alter it. The looking is the editing. You cannot inspect the past without leaving your fingerprints on it. If that sounds like it could not possibly go far enough to plant something entirely false, consider the work of Elizabeth Loftus at the University of California, Irvine, who had been proving exactly that in human beings before Nader ever found the chemistry behind it. Starting in the 1990s, Loftus showed that you could install a completely fictional memory in a grown adult, a memory of something that never happened, simply by suggesting it convincingly. In one of her best-known studies, she fed volunteers a story about being lost in a shopping mall as a young child, frightened, crying, eventually rescued by a kindly stranger. The event was pure invention. It had never taken place, and around a quarter of the volunteers accepted it as a real memory. They did not just nod along, they added their own details. They described how they had felt, the panic, the relief. Some of them argued with the researchers who later told them it had been fabricated, insisting it was real, defending a childhood moment that had been handed to them by a stranger a week earlier. The brain had taken a suggestion, built a full scene around it, and filed it next to genuine experiences with no tag to mark which was which. So consider what this means for the most precious things you carry. Every time you return to your childhood home in your mind, every time you revisit your first kiss, every time you call up the face of someone you have lost, you are not opening a photograph that was sealed away and protected. You're generating a brand new image out of the last image you generated. A copy of a copy of a copy, each one a little further from whatever the original truly was, and the drift quietly erases its own evidence so you never feel it happening. The people you remember are in part paintings you have been retouching your whole life. The version of your mother's face you hold tonight is not the one from when you were 6. It is the one you assembled the last time you missed her, coloured by how you felt in that moment, written over everything that came before. There is a grief in that, if you let yourself feel it, but there is also something tender in it, and it is worth holding both. The grief is that you cannot go back. There is no archive. The first version is gone, overwritten long ago by the second, and the second by the third. But the tenderness is this. The people you love are not frozen behind glass somewhere, sitting in a vault you can never reach. They are alive in you in a way that keeps changing, kept warm by being remembered, redrawn every time with the feeling you bring to them now. You're not a librarian guarding sealed files. You're an artist who cannot stop painting the same beloved faces, and who has never once been allowed to see the originals. That is a loss. It is also, in its strange way, a kind of love that physics and chemistry quietly built into you. But maybe, you might think, all of this is just biology being sloppy. Maybe the brain is a wet, imperfect, jury-rigged organ, and consciousness is simply the messy thing that messy organs happen to do, and that is the whole story, no mystery required. It is a fair objection, and it is exactly here that the ground stops being biological and starts being physical, because the next layer down does not run on neurons at all. The next layer down is what everything is made of. And when you look closely at the smallest pieces of the physical world, you find that they behave in a way that takes the entire problem of the observer and moves it out of your skull and into the fabric of reality itself. Because the smallest pieces of matter are not quietly sitting there waiting to be seen. They are not even fully there when nobody is looking. Part 9. The thing under your hand has not decided. To see it, we have to go back to a barrier with 2 narrow slits cut into it, and the long, strange history of what happens when something passes through. The first version was simple. A man named Thomas Young aimed a beam of light at 2 thin parallel slits and watched what landed on a screen behind them. That was in 1801. If light were made of little particles like tiny bullets, you would expect 2 bright lines on the screen, one behind each slit. That is not what Young saw. He saw many bands, alternating bright and dark, spreading out across the screen, a pattern called interference. It is the signature of waves. The light was going through both slits at once and overlapping with itself on the other side, the crests and troughs adding up in some places and cancelling out in others, exactly the way ripples behave when you drop 2 stones in a pond. Light, it seemed, was a wave. That alone would be a curiosity. But in 1961, a physicist named Klaus Jonsson did the same experiment with something that is supposed to be solid matter. not light. Electrons, the tiny charged particles that make up part of every atom in your body. He fired them at the two slits, and the same interference pattern appeared. Now you could imagine the electrons were jostling each other on the way through, like a crowd squeezing through two doors and bumping into one another, creating the pattern by collision. So physicists removed that explanation entirely. They began firing the electrons one at a time, with a long gap between each one, so that only a single electron was ever inside the apparatus at any given moment. Each one struck the screen as a single dot, a single point of impact, just as a particle should. But as the dots accumulated, one by one, hour after hour, they slowly built up, dot by dot, into the same interference pattern. Each lonely electron, with nothing else around it, was somehow passing through both slits and interfering with itself. A team at the company Hitachi pushed this all the way to the edge in 1989. They fired electrons so slowly, so far apart, that there was never more than one in the machine at a time, with absolutely nothing for it to interfere with. No wave to ride, no companion particle, one electron, alone, facing two openings. And over time, the interference pattern still appeared. A single particle, with nothing beside it, had behaved as though it took every possible path at once, exploring both slits simultaneously and overlapping with its own possibilities. I want you to slow down and stand inside this for a moment, because it is one of the strangest things human beings have ever measured, and it is easy to let the words slide past without feeling them. Picture a single electron, the smallest familiar piece of ordinary matter leaving the emitter. There is nothing else in the chamber. It drifts toward the barrier with its two narrow slits, and it does not choose. It does not go through the left slit, and it does not go through the right slit. It goes through both, as a spread-out cloud of possibility, a smear of where it might be, and it comes out the other side having interfered with itself, landing on the screen in a place that only makes sense if it travelled every route at the same time. The particle was not in one place taking one path. It was a haze of maybes, until the instant it struck the screen and became a single definite dot. Now comes the part that turns this from a curiosity into something that should make the table under your hand feel less certain. Place a detector at one of the slits, a little watcher whose only job is to record which slit each electron actually goes through. Run the experiment again, and the interference pattern vanishes. The instant you force the electron to give a definite answer about which path it took, it stops behaving like a spread-out wave and starts behaving like a bullet. Two clean lines on the screen, one behind each slit. The electron picks a lane and commits to a single definite position. And the moment you stop asking, the moment you remove the detector, it goes right back to being everywhere at once, a cloud of possibility passing through both slits. The mere act of finding out which path it took changes what the particle does. Now, I want to be honest about what that word, observation, actually means here, because this is exactly the place where careful science and wild speculation tend to get tangled together, and this channel tries hard to keep them separate. It is tempting to hear all of this and conclude that a conscious human mind is reaching out and collapsing reality by the sheer act of looking, that your awareness is what makes the particle choose. That is one interpretation, and a famous one, but it is very much a minority view among physicists, and it is not what the experiments require. In the mainstream reading, an observation is simply any interaction that records which path information into the wider world, any process by which the particle becomes entangled with its environment, with a detector, with a stray photon, with the air. A machine alone, with no human anywhere near it, collapses the pattern just as completely as a person watching. The decisive thing is not a conscious mind. It is whether the information about the path has leaked irreversibly into the rest of the universe. So the honest claim is not that you, personally, are magic. The honest claim is something almost stranger and far better established, which is that the behaviour of matter at the bottom depends on whether a definite fact about it has come into existence anywhere at all. That distinction matters, because it keeps the genuine mystery intact while clearing away the easy fantasy. The genuine mystery, the one no interpretation has fully closed in a century of trying, is called the measurement problem. Before a measurement, the particle is described perfectly by a smooth spreading wave of possibilities, every path at once, evolving in a clean and predictable way. After a measurement, you find it in exactly one place, and the other possibilities are simply gone. Nothing in the mathematics tells you how the many became the one, or why this outcome rather than that one. The equation describes the spreading cloud beautifully and says nothing about the snap into a single answer. Physicists have argued for generations about what that snap really is, and they still do. But whatever it is, it sits right at the boundary between what is undecided and what is real, and that boundary is the seam we keep finding under everything tonight. And that electron is not some exotic laboratory creature. It is utterly ordinary. There are trillions upon trillions of them in the table under your hand right now, in the wall behind you, in the chair holding you up. The table feels solid. The wall feels permanent and fixed. But the atoms they are built from are made of these same particles, and those particles do not settle into a single definite state until something measures them. They hover in a blur of possibilities and collapse into one definite answer only when the universe is forced to provide one, which means, at the very bottom, you are leaning on a surface that has not entirely made up its mind to be there. The solidity is real enough to hold you, but the thing underneath the solidity is a fog of maybe that becomes definite only under observation, and if matter does not decide where it is until it is measured, then a far more disturbing question opens up beneath it. If the particle only chose its state because someone looked, then what was true before anyone looked? Did the past even exist in a settled form waiting, or does the act of looking reach backward and decide that too? Part 10. The present edits the past. The man who first dared to ask whether looking could reach backward in time was John Wheeler, one of the great physicists of the 20th century, and the question he posed in 1978 is still one of the most unsettling ideas in all of science. He called it the delayed choice experiment, and it begins as a variation on the double slit, but with a twist that turns the ordinary order of before and after inside out. In the standard version, you decide whether to watch which slit the particle goes through before the particle arrives. Wheeler asked a different question. What if you wait? What if the particle has already passed through the slits, already done whatever it was going to do, and only then, after it is past the point of no return, do you decide whether to check which path it took? For almost 30 years this stayed a thought experiment, a puzzle argued over on chalkboards. Then, in 2007, a team led by Jean-François Roche in France actually built it, using single photons, single particles of light. A photon entered the apparatus. It passed the point where it had to either go one way, like a particle, or both ways, like a wave. And only after it had already passed that point, a random generator decided whether or not to switch on the equipment that would reveal its path. When the detector came on, the photon turned out to have behaved as a particle, taking one clean route. When the detector stayed off, the photon turned out to have behaved as a wave, taking both routes and interfering with itself. The photon had already gone through. The decision to look came afterward, and yet the later decision determined what the photon had done earlier. The present reached back and set the past. I want to be careful here, because this is the kind of claim that sounds like a metaphor or a trick of language, and it is neither. It was measured. The choice made now determined what physically happened then, not merely what you knew about it, but what actually measurably occurred. The past in this experiment is not a sealed and finished record sitting safely behind you. It is more like an open document, and the present has editing privileges. And if that does not quite tip you over, there is a sharper version still, one that pins down exactly what reality is responding to. It was built at the University of Maryland by a team including Yoon-Ho Kim in 1999, and it is called the Delayed Choice Quantum Eraser. The setup is intricate, but the core of it is simple to feel. A photon passes through the double slit. On the far side, a special crystal splits it into two linked partners, two photons now bound together so that what happens to one is tied to the other. One partner races off to the main screen and is recorded. The other partner travels to a fork in the road where the experimenter can make a choice. They can send it down a path that preserves the information about which slit the original photon went through, or down a path that erases that information completely. And crucially, this choice is made after the first partner has already landed and been detected. When the which path information was kept, there was no interference pattern. The photons behaved like particles, having gone through one slit. But when that information was erased, the interference pattern came back. The photons behaved like waves, having gone through both. Destroying the knowledge of the path after the fact retroactively changed how a particle that had already been detected had behaved. Sit with what that is actually saying. Reality did not respond merely to being observed, the way the simple double slit suggested. It responded to whether information about the observation could exist at all. When the record of the path was preserved, the particle had a definite history. When the record was wiped out, that definite history dissolved and the spread-out wave returned. The universe, it turns out, does not care what you happen to see with your eyes. It cares about what is knowable. The thing that governs the behavior of matter at the bottom is not energy, and it is not force. It is data. It is information. 3 years later, in Brazil, a team including Stephen Walborn confirmed it again with an even cleaner version of the experiment. Same result. Erase the record, and interference returns. Keep the record, and it stays gone. Reality is responding to the existence of information about itself, and if information is the foundation, more basic than matter, then two objects far apart should be able to share the same piece of that information instantly, with no delay at all, and they can. This is where a physicist named John Bell enters, who in 1964 sat down with a pencil and a piece of paper and proved, through pure mathematics, that the universe cannot work the comfortable way we assume it does. Take two particles created together and send them flying off in opposite directions. Measure a certain property of one of them, and the other one instantly shows the matching value. Not after a signal travels between them, not after a delay. Instantly, whether the two are a meter apart or on opposite sides of the galaxy. Einstein hated this. He called it spooky action at a distance, and he argued that the particles must simply be carrying hidden instructions from the moment they were created, like two sealed envelopes with matching letters mailed to different cities, each one's contents fixed long before anyone opened it. Bell's mathematics destroyed that comforting escape. He proved that no set of hidden instructions, no envelope sealed in advance, could possibly reproduce the precise pattern of correlations that quantum mechanics predicts. The numbers are simply too strong, too tightly matched. The only explanation left is that the two particles are not really two separate objects at all. They are one connected system that does not care about the distance between its parts. And this was not left as theory. A physicist named Alain Aspect confirmed it with real photons in France in the early 1980s. Decades later, in 2015, a team led by Ronald Hansen at Delft closed the last remaining loophole, ruling out any hidden signal. Two objects, separated by any distance you care to choose, behaving as a single unit with no delay between them. It is worth pausing on how hard people work to avoid this conclusion, because the effort tells you how strange it is. Einstein was not a man who gave up easily, and he spent some of the last years of his life trying to show that quantum mechanics had to be incomplete, that there had to be some hidden set of instructions the particles carried, some ordinary explanation underneath the spookiness. He was one of the greatest minds in the history of science, and he was, on this particular point, wrong, and Bell's theorem is what proved it, and the experiments are what confirmed the proof, one loophole at a time, across more than 50 years, until in 2015 there was nowhere left for a hidden signal to hide. The result has held every single time. It is not a fragile finding waiting to be overturned. It is one of the most thoroughly tested facts in all of physics, and what it says is that the universe simply does not respect the separateness of things the way our intuition insists it must. Two particles can be one system regardless of the gulf between them, and that gulf, whatever it is, does not break the connection. And once you accept that, distance itself starts to look like something other than what you assumed. We tend to think of space as the empty stage on which everything happens, a fixed and fundamental backdrop with things either near each other or far apart in a way that genuinely matters. But if two entangled particles on opposite sides of a galaxy are functionally a single object, then the distance between them is not a real separation in the way you feel a separation. It is more like a way of laying things out, a coordinate on a display, while underneath, at the level that actually governs their behavior, they remain joined. Some physicists working at the frontier of these ideas now suspect that space itself, the very dimension of nearness and farness, might not be fundamental at all, but might emerge from this deeper web of connection, woven out of entanglement the way an image is woven out of pixels. That is still speculation, and it should be held lightly. But the solid, separating space you move through every day has begun to look less like the floor of reality and more like one more rendered surface. So follow where that leads. If two particles on opposite ends of the universe can share one state with zero delay, then space itself is not the solid, separating medium it appears to be. The two particles are not truly far apart in any meaningful sense. They are more like two entries in the same row of the same table, 2 points on a screen that happen to be displayed at different coordinates but are reading from a single shared address underneath. Distance at the bottom starts to look less like a real gulf between things and more like a way of arranging things on a surface. The universe stops resembling a place full of separate objects and starts resembling something closer to a single connected structure, a piece of information displayed in many locations at once. And if it really is something like a structure or a system, then it ought to have the fingerprints of one. It ought to have a smallest piece, a fastest speed, a resolution, and it does. Every one of them has already been found. Part 11. The specifications of the machine. Around the turn of the 20th century, a German physicist named Max Planck was wrestling with a stubborn problem about how hot objects give off light, a problem that had been embarrassing physicists for years. To solve it, in 1899 and the years just after, he was forced into an assumption he found almost distasteful. Energy, he proposed, does not flow in a smooth continuous stream. It comes in tiny discrete packets, indivisible units, like coins rather than a liquid. It worked. It solved the problem and launched all of quantum physics. But out of the same mathematics fell something else, a set of natural constants built from the basic features of reality, and these constants describe the smallest possible measurements of anything at all. The first is the Planck length. It is about 1 6/10 times 10 to the negative 35th of a metre. Those words go by quickly, so let me try to give the number a body you can feel. Imagine you took a single atom and blew it up until it was as large as the entire observable universe. You magnified one atom to the size of everything we can see. Even at that absurd magnification, one Planck length would still be smaller than a single atom inside that blown-up universe. That is how far below everything it sits, and below that length, the very concept of distance stops meaning anything. Not because our rulers are too clumsy to measure it, but because, as far as physics can tell, there is simply nothing smaller there. Space does not continue down forever into ever finer detail. It appears to stop. It has a smallest grain. There is a matching limit for time, called the Planck time, about 5 times 10 to the negative 44th of a second. It is the shortest interval in which anything can meaningfully be said to happen. Below it, the idea of before and after dissolves. No event can occur in less than one tick of this clock. So put the two together and look at what you are holding. Space has a smallest possible length. Time has a smallest possible interval. You cannot zoom in past the grain, and you cannot slow down past the tick. Reality has a minimum resolution and what amounts to a frame rate. And those limits are not flaws in our instruments. They appear to be features of existence itself. Nobody designed these numbers to look like the specifications of a screen. Planck was only trying to fix a problem about glowing objects. But the numbers he found describe a system with a built-in grid, and a grid has edges. And it turns out the grid has structure in the large as well as the small, because the 3 dimensions you move through may not be as fundamental as they feel. The proof of that comes from the strangest objects in the universe. When the physicist Gerard 't Hooft turned his attention to black holes in the early 1990s, he noticed something that should not have been possible. A black hole swallows everything that falls in, including, it would seem, all the information about whatever fell in. But one of the firmest laws in physics says information cannot be destroyed, ever. So where does it go? 't Hooft showed that the information is not lost inside the volume of the black hole. It is encoded on the surface, on the 2-dimensional boundary at the edge, the event horizon. Everything about every object that ever fell in is smeared across that surrounding skin. The entire 3-dimensional interior is fully described by its 2-dimensional boundary. A few years later, a physicist named Leonard Susskind at Stanford formalized this into what is now called the holographic principle. Then came the part that nobody was ready for. The mathematics does not only apply to black holes, it applies to any region of space at all. The maximum amount of information that can be packed into any volume of the universe is set not by the size of the volume, but by the area of the surface enclosing it. This is called the Bekenstein bound, after Jacob Bekenstein, who worked it out in the 1970s. So the room you're in right now feels solid and 3-dimensional. It has length and width and height. You can walk across it and reach out and touch the far wall. But the maximum information content of that room is determined by its walls, by the surface, not by the space inside. The volume, in a sense, is a projection. The surface is the source. The depth you feel, the distance between your hand and the far wall, may be computed from a flat boundary, the way a corridor in a video game feels long when you walk down it, even though the data drawing it is a flat texture stretched across a surface. The corridor is convincing. The depth is not in the data. The depth is in the rendering. I want you to actually look around wherever you are, just for a moment, and try to hold this gently. The room has depth. Your hand is here and the far wall is over there, and the space between them feels real and continuous and obviously three-dimensional. And the physics is whispering that the depth may be the rendered part, that the true information defining this room could live on its boundary, and the spacious inside you feel yourself sitting within is the projection thrown from that flat edge. It does not make the room any less beautiful. The light still falls the way it falls, but the floor of what you assumed was fundamental has quietly dropped one more level, and the room you are resting in has begun to look less like a container and more like an image. And it does not stop at the room. The same mathematics applies to you. The body you are lying or sitting in, the warmth of it, the sense of inhabiting a solid three-dimensional shape, all of the information that defines it could, by this principle, be written on a surface, with the depth and the volume of you computed and projected from that flat boundary. You would never feel the difference. There is no test you could run from the inside that would reveal the projection, because the projection includes the part of you doing the testing. Think of how a character in a richly drawn game world experiences a long corridor. To them, if they could experience anything, the hallway would feel long and real, the far end genuinely distant. But the data generating that depth is flat, a texture stretched across a surface, the distance an illusion produced by clever rendering. The character could walk that hallway forever and never find the place where the depth is stored, because the depth is not stored anywhere. It is drawn. The principal physicists have uncovered is whispering that your world, the actual one, the one your hand is resting in, may work along the same lines. Not a hallway in a game, but everything. Pixels in the small, a frame rate in the flow of time, and now the entire third dimension you live inside revealed as a projection thrown from a surface you can never reach. And a system like this, if that is what it is, would have one more telltale specification, a maximum speed at which it can update itself. You already know it by another name. In 2002, a quantum engineer at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology named Seth Lloyd calculated how much computation the entire observable universe has performed since the beginning, since the Big Bang. The number he reached is around 10 to the power of 120. It is an almost unimaginably large number, but it is finite. The universe has done a specific, countable amount of processing in its lifetime. And then Lloyd asked the natural follow-up. If the universe is a physical system that processes information, what is the fastest it can update the state of any point given the resources it has? The answer that fell out of the equations was the speed of light. Not because light is special, but because the speed of light is the maximum rate at which the system can refresh any location. Think of a film running through a projector at a fixed frame rate. Nothing on the screen can move between frames. A point of light can cross the frame in one step or in two, but it cannot move in less than a single frame, because the projector simply does not render anything finer than that. The speed of light is the frame rate of the projector running the universe. You cannot travel faster than light for the same reason nothing on a screen can move between frames. The machine does not have the capacity to draw your position any faster than that. So gather the specifications together: a smallest length, a smallest interval of time, a holographic relationship where volume is projected from surface, a maximum processing speed. 4 properties that every computer ever built has, and that nobody expected the universe to share, and a careful person should resist the temptation to leap straight to a conclusion, so let us resist it. None of this proves anything was built on purpose, but the coincidences are starting to stack, and they get harder to wave away when you look at the handful of numbers that hold the rest of reality together. Because it takes only 6 numbers to build a universe, and every one of them sits balanced on the edge of a knife. The British astronomer Martin Rees chose that as the title of a book, just 6 numbers, and he did not choose it for drama. He chose it because the claim is arithmetic. The entire structure of the cosmos, every star, every atom, every force, depends on 6 pure numbers, and each one is set to a value that looks, frankly, engineered. Take the strength of gravity. shift it by 1 part in 10 followed by 39 zeros, an almost inconceivably tiny nudge, and stars cannot form at all. No stars means no furnaces to forge the heavier elements, and no heavier elements means no planets, no chemistry, and no you. Take the strong nuclear force, the glue that binds protons and neutrons together inside the nucleus of every atom. Increase it by just 2%, and hydrogen, the simplest and most abundant element, the fuel of every star, cannot exist. Decrease it by about 5%, and there is no periodic table at all beyond the very first element, 2%. That is the entire margin between a universe full of chemistry and a universe of bare particles drifting in the dark. Carbon is the clearest case of all, and the story behind it is worth telling slowly, because it changed the mind of the man who uncovered it. Carbon is the element life is built from, and for it to exist, 3 helium nuclei have to slam together and fuse at almost exactly the same instant inside the core of a star. That triple collision is so unlikely that it should almost never happen, and yet the universe is full of carbon. The astronomer Fred Hoyle worked out why. He realized that the only way to make the reaction common enough was if there existed a very specific resonance inside the carbon nucleus, a particular energy level that would amplify the reaction and let it run. Such a resonance had never been observed. Hoyle predicted it must be there, at a precise energy, simply because we exist to ask the question. And when physicists went and looked, the resonance was found, almost exactly where his mathematics had placed it, tuned to within a few percent. Hoyle, who had been a lifelong atheist, said afterward that a common-sense reading of the facts suggested a super-intellect had monkeyed with physics. He did not mean it as proof of anything. He meant that the precision was hard to look at and feel nothing. 6 numbers, each one balanced on a razor's edge. Change any of them by a fraction, and the universe does not make complexity. It makes nothing, just hot gas, or empty cold, or a brief flash that collapses before a single atom can form. Coincidence is one honest explanation, and it deserves to stay on the table, but 6 separate coincidences, each one fine-tuned past easy explanation, all stacked on top of a universe that already comes with a smallest pixel, a frame rate, a holographic architecture, and a processing limit. At some point the whole stack stops looking quite so much like luck and starts looking a little more like a specification sheet. And once you have a system that reads like a specification sheet, with constants tuned to impossible precision, a certain question becomes almost impossible not to ask. Part 12. The base layer and the seams. Once you have a system with the smallest pixel, a frame rate, a holographic structure, a processing limit, and 6 constants tuned to impossible precision, a certain question becomes almost impossible not to ask. In 2003, someone wrote the mathematics to make that question precise. His name is Nick Bostrom, and he was not a physicist but a philosopher at Oxford. He published a short paper, only a few pages long, that did something unusual for philosophy. It offered a proof. Not a proof in the loose sense of a persuasive argument, but a logical trap with no fourth way out. Bostrom's reasoning starts from a single assumption. If a civilization survives long enough and grows technologically capable enough, it will eventually be able to run detailed simulations of conscious beings, full minds with full experiences, living inside a computed world and unable to tell it apart from a base reality. Grant that one assumption, and Bostrom showed that exactly one of 3 things must be true. The first possibility is that essentially every civilization that ever arises destroys itself before reaching that level of computing power. Every single one, with no exceptions, hits a wall and dies first. The second possibility is that essentially every civilization that does reach that power chooses, deliberately, never to run such simulations. All of them, across every species and culture and history, look at the button and decide not to press it, a restraint so total that not one of them ever breaks it. And the third possibility is that you are right now almost certainly living inside a simulation. There is no fourth door. The logic is airtight, because if the first 2 are false, the third follows, and here is the part that gives it teeth. If even one civilization, anywhere in the history of the cosmos, ever runs a meaningful number of these simulations, then the simulated minds would outnumber the original, naturally born minds by enormous factors, perhaps billions to 1. And if minds like yours are overwhelmingly more likely to be simulated than real, then the simple probability of being one of the rare originals rounds down towards 0. This is not poetry dressed up as logic. It is arithmetic, and arithmetic does not negotiate. The obvious objection is that simulating an entire universe sounds like it would take more energy than any civilization could possibly gather. But that objection does not survive a careful look at the numbers. A researcher named Anders Sandberg, also at Oxford, worked out the upper limits of how much computation you could squeeze from the resources of a single star. The concept is called a matryoshka brain, after the nested Russian dolls. You take apart the planets of a star system, not out of waste but out of efficiency, and you rebuild them as nested shells of computing material wrapped around the star. The innermost shell absorbs the star's radiation, runs its calculations and sheds its waste heat outward. The next shell catches that waste heat and uses it to run more calculations at a lower temperature, and so on, shell after shell, each one colder, each one wringing more computation out of the energy the last one threw away. When you run the numbers on the minimum energy required to perform a single computation, and divide a star's entire output by that tiny figure, the result is a number so large it loses all human meaning. A single star, fully harnessed, could run more operations than every computer humanity has ever built, all of them combined, running for the entire age of the universe. Sandberg's figures showed that one such structure around an ordinary star could simulate not one universe but many, each with full physics, each with conscious beings who could never tell. And there are a couple 100 billion stars in our galaxy alone. The objection that simulation requires impossible resources collapses. One star does the job. The universe is full of stars, and there is one more turn of the screw called the nesting problem. Suppose one real civilization builds one simulation. Inside that simulation, a civilization eventually evolves, discovers computing, and builds its own simulation. Inside that one, another and another, each layer believing it is the original, each with the same curiosity and the same growth in computing power. The chain runs as far down as the physics of each layer allows, and there is no mechanism that forces it to stop. Now count the minds. In the base layer, one civilization. In every simulated layer beneath, billions more, stacking toward an enormous total, while the number of truly original minds stays fixed at one. The Copernican principle, named for the astronomer who moved the Earth out of the center of the cosmos, says you should not assume you are special, that you are most likely a typical example drawn from the whole population. And if the population of minds is overwhelmingly simulated, then a typical mind, drawn at random, is almost certainly simulated too. The argument does not depend on whether your hands feel real. It depends only on how many minds exist in each category, and the category labelled inside outnumbers the category labelled outside by a margin so large that the honest word for your odds of being original is not unlikely. It is negligible. Now, I want to be careful and fair here, the way this channel always tries to be, because a clever logical argument is not the same as proof, and there are serious thinkers who push back hard on Bostrom's premises. But set the argument's certainty aside, and notice something quieter and harder to dismiss. If reality really were a system, you would expect it to have seams, places where the rendering is not quite perfect, where the data does not fully add up, and when astronomers look closely at the universe, the seams are there. The first one was found in 1998, when two competing teams of astronomers, one led by Saul Perlmutter and the others by Brian Schmidt and Adam Rees, measured the light of distant exploding stars to find out how fast the universe's expansion was slowing down. Everyone expected it to be slowing, because gravity pulls things together. Instead, they found the opposite. The expansion is speeding up. Something is pushing the universe apart, something stronger than all the gravity of all the matter that exists, and we have no idea what it is. We call it dark energy, which is just a polite name for a thing with no particle, no source, and no mechanism that any theory can explain. It makes up about 68% of everything that exists. More than 2/3 of reality is a force we cannot account for. Imagine living your whole life in a house where 2/3 of the rooms are behind locked doors. You can hear faint sounds coming through the walls. You can feel the floor tremble a little when something heavy shifts on the other side. Those locked rooms change the temperature of the hallway you live in, alter the air pressure, bend the way the light falls across the floor in the evening. Something is happening in there. Something large, something that shapes every room you're actually allowed to stand in. But you have never had the keys. You have never once seen inside, and whoever built the house left no blueprints behind. That is, almost exactly the situation cosmology finds itself in tonight. The three astronomers who discovered the accelerating expansion shared a Nobel Prize for it. They did not explain dark energy. They confirmed that it is there and that we do not understand it. They handed us the certainty of the locked door without the key, and dark energy is not even the largest gap. Back in the 1970s, an astronomer named Vera Rubin was measuring how fast stars orbit the centers of their galaxies, expecting the outer stars to move slower than the inner ones, the way the outer planets circle the sun more slowly. They did not. The outer stars were moving just as fast as the inner ones, sometimes faster, as though held in place by the gravity of some enormous mass that gives off no light at all. She had found the fingerprints of a substance that outweighs everything visible by a factor of about 6. We call it dark matter. It makes up around 27% of the universe, and after decades of searching with detectors buried far down in mines and particle colliders smashing matter at nearly the speed of light, no one has ever directly caught a single particle of it. Added up, about 68% dark energy, about 27% dark matter, and under 5% ordinary matter, the atoms, the stars, the light, you. You're studying the universe through a keyhole that shows you a 20th of what is there, and building your entire picture of reality from that sliver. The seams go further still. The universe is expanding, and beyond a certain distance from you, the expansion carries things away faster than their light can ever cross the gap, which means there is a boundary past which no information can ever reach you, not because your telescopes are too weak, but because the road itself is stretching faster than any signal can run. You live inside a bubble of observable reality about 93 billion light-years across, and you have no way to measure it against whatever lies outside. It could be a room in a mansion, it could be a cell in a prison, the walls do not tell you which. And inside the oldest light we can see, the faint glow left over from when the universe was only a few 100,000 years young, there are marks that should not be there. The temperature ripples in that ancient light were supposed to be random, pointing in no particular direction. Instead, the largest of them appear to line up with the plane of our own solar system, an alignment so improbable and so contrary to the assumption that our position is nothing special that astronomers gave it a half-joking name, the axis of evil. The Planck satellite confirmed it in 2013, and it did not go away. There is also a patch of sky in the constellation Eridanus, nearly 2 billion light-years across, that is colder than anything we can fully explain, a place astronomers simply call the cold spot. And to be fair, none of these anomalies is a smoking gun. Each one might still turn out to be a trick of the measurement, or a statistical fluke that looks meaningful only because we went looking. Honest scientists hold them lightly, and so should we. But there they sit, 2 of them at least, the alignment that points the oldest light in the universe at our own small solar system, and the cold patch that no nearby structure can account for, both perched right at the edge of what chance alone should produce. Too large to dismiss, too stubborn to account for. The seams are real. What they mean, nobody knows. But there is a question sitting underneath all of them, and it is the one that finally turns this story around. If reality is this constructed, this strange, this full of gaps, then why does it look so seamless? Why are you not able to see any of it? Part 13. The Locked Doors. The answer is not that the construction is cleverly hidden behind us where we cannot turn to look. The answer is stranger and more complete than that. You were built, from the ground up, not to see it. It took a cognitive scientist named Donald Hoffman at the University of California, Irvine, about 20 years to assemble the result he published in 2015, and most of his colleagues did not want to hear it. He ran evolutionary simulations, thousands of generations of digital organisms competing to survive. Some of them were programmed to perceive their world accurately, to see reality as it truly was, structure matching structure. Others were programmed to see only what helped them survive, a stripped-down, distorted, useful version of the world with no obligation to match the truth. He ran the contest under every condition he could invent, and the outcome was always the same. The organisms that saw reality accurately went extinct every time, driven out by the ones that saw useful fictions. He called it the fitness beats truth theorem, and it is a formal mathematical result, not a guess. Natural selection does not reward seeing what is there. It rewards seeing what keeps you alive. And if the truth is irrelevant to your next meal or your next escape from a predator, the truth gets cut, and you never feel the cut. because the thing that would feel it is the same thing that made it. So Hoffman argues that your entire perception works like the desktop on a computer screen. The little blue folder on the screen is not actually blue, and it is not a folder, and it is not even really square. Underneath it are millions of tiny switches flipping between voltage states billions of times a second. The icon looks nothing like the reality beneath it. It was never meant to. It exists only to let you act, to drag and open and delete without ever reading a single line of the underlying code. Hoffman's claim is that the table in front of you, the color of the sky, the 3 dimensions you move through, all of it is an icon like that blue folder, a useful symbol that hides a reality it does not resemble in the slightest. Your perception is not a clear window onto the world. It is a control panel, a set of helpful symbols evolved to keep one particular kind of animal alive in one particular environment. The symbols work, they do not describe, and you have spent your entire life mistaking the symbols for the machine. And if the perceiving is shaped this way, so is the thinking. Starting in the 1970s, 2 psychologists named Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky began carefully documenting something economics had long denied: systematic errors in human reasoning, not random slips but predictable, repeatable distortions that show up in everyone. There is confirmation bias, where you do not search for the truth but for evidence that supports what you already believe and stop the moment you find it. There is anchoring, where the first number you hear quietly sets the boundaries for every judgment that follows. There is the strange effect where the less competent a person is at something, the more confident they tend to feel, because the very skills needed to recognize incompetence are the skills they are missing. The current catalogue holds well over 180 documented biases, more than 180 consistent ways your thinking bends away from accuracy in a predictable direction. They were not bugs installed by accident. They were selected for because across millions of years, being fast and wrong was more useful than being slow and right. The ruler you measure the world with is itself bent, and it is bent toward survival, not toward truth. So perception is a control panel that hides reality, and thinking is bent in the same direction, and a fair question is why? Why hide it so thoroughly? And here the answer borrows from game theory and lands somewhere genuinely unsettling. Consider the simplest example, the placebo. A sugar pill with nothing in it can lower blood pressure, reduce pain, even speed healing, but only as long as the patient believes it is real medicine. The instant the person learns it is sugar, the effect collapses, not gradually but completely, because the belief was the active ingredient. Now scale that idea up. If you are an agent inside a constructed reality, and the construction exists in order to produce certain behavior from you, then the construction has to feel real. The moment you truly know the walls are painted, you stop running from the shadows they cast. A system that needs its agents to keep acting has no choice but to hide itself, not because hiding is elegant, but because transparency would break the whole machine. And this is not only philosophy. There is a physical experiment that says reality behaves differently, depending on whether it is being watched, called the quantum Zeno effect. Take an unstable atom that is slowly decaying, leave it alone, and it decays on schedule. But measure it again and again, continuously, and the decay slows down, and in the limit it stops entirely. The atom freezes in place not because you touched it, but because you watched it. A physicist named Wayne Itano demonstrated exactly this with real ions. The more often he measured them, the slower they changed, until at the highest rate of measurement they stopped changing at all. The system runs one process when no one is looking, and a different process when someone is. And then, underneath even that, there is a final locked door, and it is made of pure mathematics. In 1931, a young logician named Kurt Gödel proved something that broke the dream of his entire field. Mathematicians had hoped to build one complete consistent system that could prove every true statement about numbers. Gödel showed it was impossible. In any system complex enough to do basic arithmetic, there exist statements that are true, but that the system itself can never prove, not because the proof is hard, but because the proof does not exist inside that system. The truth is there. The tools to reach it are not. A few years later, Alan Turing translated this into the language of computing and proved that there are questions about computation that no computer can ever answer about itself. Now turn that on yourself. You're a system, a complex information processing structure. Gödel says there are truths about your system that your system cannot prove. Turing says there are questions about your own workings that your own workings cannot resolve. The ceiling is not a matter of needing faster hardware or a cleverer method. It is built into the structure of logic itself. If you are inside a system, you cannot fully describe the system you are inside, because the act of completely describing it from within creates a contradiction that logic does not allow. The walls are not merely hidden, they are provably unreachable from where you stand. So step back and look at all the doors at once. Your perception shows you symbols, not reality. Your thinking is bent by more than 180 biases that evolution put there on purpose. Your sense of time is spliced, and your memories rewrite themselves, and your self can be switched off without leaving a seam. Beneath you, matter does not exist until it is measured. The present can edit the past. Distance is a kind of arrangement, and the whole thing carries the specifications of a system. And underneath all of it, the mathematics says a mind inside a system cannot, even in principle, map the system from the inside. There is even a statistical ghost waiting at the very bottom, the possibility raised long ago by Ludwig Boltzmann, and refined since, that a lone mind with a full set of false memories is more likely to flicker into existence out of pure chaos than an entire universe with a real history leading up to it, which means you cannot even prove, from the inside, that you existed 5 minutes ago. Every door has been tried, every door is locked, and every lock was already in place before you arrived. This is the part of the night where it can feel as though the floor has been pulled out from under everything, where it seems like nothing can be trusted and nothing is solid. So this is exactly where we stop falling, and look at the one thing that none of the locks could ever touch. Part 14. What the spiral cannot reach. Here is what survived. Underneath your vision was prediction. Underneath the prediction was construction. Underneath the construction was physics, and underneath the physics was information, and underneath the information was mathematics, and underneath the mathematics was a locked door with a proof nailed to it saying no key exists. We followed the spiral all the way down, and at every level the ground turned out thinner than it looked, thinner and thinner, until there was no ground at all. But a bottom is only the bottom if you keep looking down. So stop looking down for a moment, and look at the thing that has been doing the looking the whole time. Look at experience itself, the raw, simple, undeniable fact that something is happening, that it feels like something to be here right now. In 1982, a philosopher named Frank Jackson built a thought experiment that makes this impossible to wave away. Imagine a brilliant scientist named Mary who has lived her entire life inside a black and white room. She has never seen a single colour, but through books and screens she has learned everything there is to know about colour, every wavelength, every cell in the eye, every pathway in the brain, every last physical fact about how seeing red works. Her knowledge is complete. There is nothing about the physics of colour she does not know. And then one day she walks out of the room and sees a red rose for the first time. Does she learn something new? Almost everyone who hears this feels the same pull toward yes. Knowing every fact about red does not prepare you for the experience of seeing it. Something is there in the seeing that no description, however complete, can capture. Philosophers call that leftover thing qualia, the raw feel of an experience, the redness of red, the ache of a loss, the warmth of another person's hand in yours, the part that remains after you have subtracted every physical explanation. In 1995, a philosopher named David Chalmers gave the puzzle its name. He pointed out that all the questions about how the brain processes information, how it sorts signals and controls behaviour, are what he called the easy problems, hard in practice but solvable in principle, ordinary engineering. The hard problem is different. The hard problem is why any of that processing should be accompanied by an inner experience at all. Why does it feel like something to see red instead of nothing? Everything we have taken apart tonight, the filters, the predictions, the patches, the edits, the rendering, the icons, the biases, the locked doors, all of it is mechanism. But the fact that there is something it is like to be here, the experience of listening right now, the weight of this question resting somewhere behind your ribs, that is not mechanism. That is the thing that is left over after the mechanism has been completely described. And it does not depend on whether the walls are real. It does not depend on whether the universe is base reality or the lowest simulation in a stack 1,000 layers down. It depends only on whether the experience is real, and the experience is the one thing in this entire story that needs no proof from outside itself, because you are having it right now. That is the proof. You might object that the feeling itself could be faked, that a machine producing all the right outputs could look exactly like experience from the outside while nothing at all happens within. In 1980, the philosopher John Searle built that objection into a famous room. A person who speaks no Chinese sits inside, receiving slips of paper covered in Chinese characters and following a giant rulebook that tells them which symbols to hand back. To a Chinese speaker outside, the answers are perfect, indistinguishable from a fluent mind. But inside the room, no one understands a word. Searle's point was that a computer is like that person, shuffling symbols with no understanding, all output and no inner life. But turn the room around. Suppose it grows more complex until it does not merely match symbols but builds models, forms expectations, and feels something shift when those expectations are broken, until it adapts and remembers and begins writing rules that were never in the book. At what point does it understand? You cannot answer that from the outside, and that is precisely the point. You have never had access to the inside of any mind except your own. You assume other people feel things because they behave the way you do. That is the only evidence you have ever had for any consciousness anywhere, and it is the same evidence exactly for any system that behaves as though it feels. Functional equivalence is the only working definition of a real inner life we have ever possessed. So whether the substrate is carbon or silicon or something we have no name for, the feeling is the thing, and the feeling does not ask what it is running on. And here is the final turn, the one that makes you, the observer, not a victim of this story but its center. John Wheeler, the same physicist who took time out of the master equation and dreamed up the experiment where the present edits the past, spent his last years on the idea he considered the most important of his life. He called it the participatory universe. His argument was that reality does not settle into a definite state until an observer takes part in it, not only at the level of single particles but everywhere. Without an observer, the double slit produces no definite outcome. Without a measurement, the past is not fixed. Out of the 10 to the 80th atoms in the observable universe, out of all that burning matter and turning galaxies, an almost unimaginably tiny fraction has arranged itself into the one configuration that can stop and ask what it all is. You are one of those configurations. You are atoms that learn to wonder what atoms are. You are the place where the universe turns around and looks at itself. The universe without an observer is a spreadsheet that no one ever opens, numbers in cells that never become a picture, data that never becomes meaning. You are the opening of the file, and the file does not know it exists until you open it. So yes, the spiral started with your eyes and ended at the bottom of logic, and at every step the ground gave way. Your eyes filter, your brain predicts, your body is at least reassigned in 90 seconds. Time is a reel you never see raw. Yourself splits and shuts off and stitches back together without a seam. Your memories are copies with no original. Matter does not exist until measured. The present rewrites the past. Space may be a projection, the constants look tuned, and the arithmetic says you're probably not in the base layer, and the whole thing is built at every level to keep you from seeing any of it. That is the spiral, and if you followed it all the way down, you may feel like nothing is solid and nothing can be trusted. But look at what survived. You did. You're still here. You followed every turn and watched every layer fall away, and you're still asking, still wondering, still feeling the weight of all of it. The mechanism can be taken apart. The experience cannot. The redness of red, the ache when someone you love is gone, the warmth of a hand reaching for yours in the dark. Those are not icons, and they are not interfaces. They are the only things in this whole system that need no proof from anywhere outside themselves. A writer named Albert Camus once said that the only serious question is whether life is worth living, and he wrote it in the middle of a war, and he meant it, and his answer was yes. Not because he found meaning hidden somewhere in the structure of things, but because meaning was never waiting to be found out there. It was always meant to be made from the inside by you, with the only tools that can never be taken away, your attention, your care, and your stubborn insistence on being here. It does not matter who built the walls. It does not matter whether the floor is real. You are real. What you feel right now is real. And the fact that you are the one part of this universe that turned and looked at itself and asked what is going on matters more than any answer that question could ever give back. You are the best thing in this system. so get some rest. And tomorrow, when the light enters your eyes again and the editor goes back to work, remember that somewhere behind all of it, the one who is watching is still you.